Okay, so quick update. I've essentially figured out the clothes dynamics and the hair dynamics and how to get clothes and hair on the character, moving with the character functionally within Blender. I still have to make sure that all this can transfer over to Unreal Engine well. I didn't spend much time on the hair or the clothes towards uh, getting it really pretty. It was more of just a test of concept for this week because it took quite a while to figure it out. So there is imperfections. This will be on YouTube. Quick render of it, different angles and stuff, just so you can get a sense of it. Brought into After Effects and played with colors a little. Obviously, that's not like a final thing, but it's, it shows potential of what could be done, skin tones and stuff. Okay, so how I did this. It's pretty simple and yet complex. So let's get rid of the clothes and the hair. Well, the clothes anyway. So you get your character. I made the hair afterwards. I probably could bring the hair into Marvelous Designer, but probably actually not. I probably have to create the hair afterwards, but I'll figure that out after. Anyway, so you have your character. You want to export the character's armature and the character's mesh. So you go ahead and you click on the armature and you click on the mesh, control click on the two. And before you do that, you actually have to bake the animation. So we're going to export as a limbic format, which a limbic formats pretty much export every single frame worth of seconds that go by. So it's a much bigger file format, but it's more accurate than an FBX or things like that. FBXs don't work in Marvelous Designer properly for animation. So what we have to do is we go to non-linear editor. We had two different animation tracks. One for the T-pose, one for the kicking, and you need a T-pose in Marvelous Designer to work properly or efficiently for making clothing. So what you do is you have to bake this animation. So I go ahead and I select the two tracks. I go into pose mode down here, I believe. You need your characters, I believe armature. Yeah, armature selected. You click on pose mode, you go to pose, you go to animation, you go to bake actions, make sure the frames are set for the right amount of frames, selected bones. You could bake it on the object, you bake it on the pose, and I do in the pose. Anyway, so you bake it, which converts everything to keyframes. So then you need to go to you need to go to dope sheet after that. And then dope sheet, you need to go to the action editor. And then you click on your armature, and you see how I have blue keyframes? The blue keyframes are actually not there at this point. They wouldn't be there normally. So every single bone has its own animation, and what I did to this point would generate the yellow frames, which are actual things changing. The blue frames are nothing's changing. They're placeholder frames, and it's precautionary for Marvelous Designer to add those. So to add those, you select your whole character, everything. And then you go to keying, and then you go to sample keys, I believe. And that should enter the blue keys in. So they're basically placeholder keys that make sure that Marvelous Designer during those keyframes doesn't get confused because of the way that it interprets the Alembic format. I'll do a much more in-depth tutorial of individual aspects of this process that I'm showing in this video at a later date when I've had more practice with it in the next couple weeks of actually producing a bunch of characters, making the scenes, and then putting it all together. I'll do like stage by stage. And then I'll do a big long video as well. So if I miss something incorrectly, you'll see it later. Okay, so then with your character and your armature selected, so you go over here, armature, and your character mesh, and then you go over here, and then you go export, and you go limbic, and then you use this little pop-out menu, and you make sure selected item is selected, and you export it to where you're exporting it. So I have mine here. And then in Marvelous Designer, I'm using version 9. Trial version for now. I might buy it, but we'll see. I'm definitely leaning forward to buying it because modeling clothes in Blender takes a whole lot more time, and doing cloth animations a whole lot more difficult than doing it with Marvelous Designer. In Marvelous Designer, we're actually going to send the animated cloth out back into Blender with new animation on it. So basically, you bring in your character, which is him, and then you basically have to model out the pieces of clothes and then stitch them together, which is a fairly straightforward, fairly simple process once you understand it. Spent about 2 days learning everything and testing it out and debugging things. But to put it simple, well, before I delete the clothes and just show you, I'm just going to show you the simulation. So if you hit the space bar, it runs a simulation, and you see the clothes fit really well on him. And I can actually, play with the cloth physics and mess with it a bit. And then there's an animation tab, which you can run this, and it'll generate the frames, which is going to take a second. So you can skip ahead if you need to, about 10 seconds, 20 seconds in the video. But it's raining out frame by frame. And it's giving it animation. I gave these fabrics a texture each, which I can show real quick. It doesn't automatically get exported back into Blender, so you have to kind of recreate that. There is a way of exporting an OBJ with the textures, but the textures don't come back exactly the same, so I don't even bother. So now I have this animation. Okay, so back to how to create all this. Let's go ahead and delete this. And oh, it's so sad. So much work gone, but it's not that much work. So you have your character. He has no texture, so he looks funny. Anyway, ooh, did I delete? No, I didn't delete part of his leg. Okay. So you have this, which is your template for your character. You basically have to go here and pick, oh no, right here, and pick, say, a rectangle. Hold on. A rectangle. Go ahead and make that rectangle about where you want it. Over here you can resize things with. So now I have this rectangle. It's on one side of his body. Then you want to make, you want to add points that you can manipulate. And I'm just doing a really sloppy job just so you get the concept real quick. And use this tool, and you can pull, oh wait, not that one. Use this tool, maybe, nope, not that. Oh, well, that one technically works, but we don't want to have to add an extra point. Okay, so this tool, I can add a neckline, and see, that looks pretty good. So then you go here, and then you can go to, where is it? Symmetrical pattern. and then you can bring it over. So in the 3D viewport, you have an opposite pattern now. Then you can go ahead and drag that back, drag that over. Then you want to get the pattern as close to the back of the character as possible. You want the front as close as possible. And then you're supposed to, which I didn't do this with the other character, you're supposed to flip the normals on the one side. I think it's on both sides. I think it's just the one side, flip normals. Anyway, I have to play around with that because it's flipping it wrong. It's not crucial, but it's something I've heard you're supposed to do. Anyway, so then you go into your stitching tool, and you basically can click here, and then shift, and then click here, and then it stitches across. If for some reason you get weird stitching that looks like this, crisscrossed, it's because you stitched from this side to that side. You're supposed to stitch in parallel, not across. So you just undo that. So go ahead and stitch across by clicking, shift clicked, hold shift and click, clicking, shift click and click, clicking, shift clicked and click. Oh, I did a cross, so I need it. Okay, so I need to do parallel. Okay, so then we had this, and then we can hit spacebar, and it actually fits them. Even though it's not an even shirt pattern, it actually works pretty well. And that only took me a minute to make. Then if you wanted to test to see if there's any issues, you can go to your animation, and you go to the very beginning, and then you do the simulation. We have issues going on here, but let's go back to the very beginning of the simulation, and let's go back to simulation up here, and then let's go garment, reset garment. If you had to make any adjustments, garment, 3D garment, reset 3D garment, gets you back to this scene so you can readjust this stuff, which I did a lot of. Okay, so you see that there's some issues going here. It's cutting through, but yet it's still kind of stitching together. So let's go back to animation one more time and see if it'll work this time, or if it's gonna fall through the character. I think it's because it started the simulation midway through that it was falling off the character. But this is not even completely symmetrical. You know, this side has a longer shoulder than that side, but yeah, it looks good. So this is a very, very quick way to get your 3D garments with animation made. For some reason, it's not letting me... Okay, for some reason it's not letting me go back and play the animation, so I'm just going to run back to simulation, and then run back to animation, and see if it'll let me drag the playhead. So it's some kind of issue going here. I'd close the program, reopen it after saving the project. I'm not going to do that just because I'm trying to be quick. So pants are similar. You create two rectangles here, and then you create some points like here and here to cut the fabric apart and then stitch it back together. So then with all this, you just export it, honestly, as a limbic, but it has to be an Agwagwe limbic format. If it's not, you run into issues. So you export as this format, and just give it a name, whatever the name might be. It doesn't really matter that much. And then you export it back in as millimeters. I believe when I tried bringing meters, I believe I bring it back in as meters, and I brought it in as centimeters. The Blender project as millimeters, but for some reason when I tried millimeters, it really messes things up in here. So importing and exporting, you may have to try multiple size formats until you find one that works properly for getting it in here so that you can properly edit it and then get it back out. I spent a lot of time because I was bringing in as the wrong size, same size format as Blender, and the mesh was not workable in here. So that's the best way of dealing with that. So you export back into Blender. So then you have to import it. So you go to import, and then you go to Alembic, and then you import. Obviously not hair cards, but Alembic. Okay, so then you have your character, and then it pretty much gives you this here, but it gives you without any textures, and without, so it gives you that, and that, as you can see, animates. But it's in perfect alignment, so it doesn't have to be connected to your character. Perfect alignment. As long as you haven't moved your character. If you moved your character, you gotta realign it. So then I did vertex painting because I didn't want to have to deal with importing and exporting textures between Blender and Unreal Engine necessarily, and I figured that vertex painting might be able to, which I'm going to object mode, clicking on the clothing, might be able to deal with that issue. But I could have done other methods. I could have done texture painting, which would have been more detailed probably, but I just settled on vertex for this one. So with vertex painting, you create a vertex group, and say I was to grab some paint, say some green. It's not letting me right this second, strangely. Okay. Why isn't it? Oh, maybe I have to be on mesh. Vertex paint. Anyway, I'll make a separate video at some point later for this because I may actually do texture painting instead. For some reason it's not working, and I'm not going to redo this video for that right now. But I'll show how to do that later. Okay, so moving on to the hair. The hair, you basically do the normal way of making it with most characters. This is not particular to MB Lab characters, what I'm about to tell you. It's more related to any character that you make in Blender. So you have your mesh, and then you go into your edit mode, and then you select where you want your hair to come out. But you do that with, where is it? Okay, so not the close. So you have the character selected. So you have vertex groups. You create a vertex group. You go into edit mode. Then you select what you want in the vertex group. You hit assign. That's telling where the hair is coming out of. Then you go into particle, and you can go back to object mode for this. And then you add a particle system. You select hair. Then you decide how much hair you want. You decide the hair length, the amount of segments. The segments has to do with the amount of movement it can get when styling the hair. And in particle edit, you can comb your hair. So you have your combing, you have your puffing, you have your cutting. I didn't spend much time at all in this area because it's more of just trying to get the hair dynamics to work properly, because I had run into a lot of trouble where the hair would penetrate the scalp in the past, and it still does it to a degree because I haven't played with it too much, but not as badly, and I can still fix it more pretty easily. And pretty much what you do is after you get your hair settings how you want it, you add the hair dynamics, and then this pin strength and also the stiffness of the hair allow you to have the hair stay put more. So the higher the pinning strength, the less the hair is going to move. See, there's no breakage in the hair. Okay, so there's some breakage there. So the hair is probably not stiff enough. So if I was to go back and I was to add some more stiffness, it's like adding hair gel to the hair. And see, there's none there, none there, none there. Okay, there is a little there. Well, I could make it more stiff. But the problem with stiffness is the more stiff you make it, the less dynamics you're going to get. Doesn't mean you're not going to get any dynamics. You're going to get some, usually. So you kind of have to play around with pinning strength and stiffness for a quick fix. There are other settings that could also help in here, but that's a lot of trial and error at this point. I could add more hair so that it, less of that happens, but there's already a ton of hair here. So adding more hair I don't think is a good solution. So yeah, basically whatever the weakest amount that works, but also the top of the head, you don't really see that from the front view. So it's only if you're rendering a view where the hair penetration is causing a problem should you even bother making the hair more stiff or anything, unless you want the hair to look more stiff. For example, right here, I lowered the settings quite a lot, and there's no penetration yet. And from this angle, which is a likely used angle, it's like you can use really, really low settings on the stiffness and pinning, and it should work. And so you get more dynamic movement when I lower it. Okay, you see this is not enough stiffness and not enough pinning. Anyway, so at this point in Blender, I know how to get clothes, I know how to get the hair, I know how to get the character fairly quickly for each of these things. The environments, I plan to make an Unreal Engine and throw the character's animation in there and do the camera in there. I just have to run one day of testing to see if I can make sure I get all the textures and the hair and the clothes and everything in properly and connected properly. If for some reason I really have too much trouble with that, and I know I need to really start production on the thesis project, I might just do everything in Blender just to simplify things. Though I do want to spend that one day and see if I can get Unreal Engine to accept everything. I know Unreal Engine has a new thing called hair grooming, and I just need to test that out with the limbic format. It's very tricky from what I can tell to get the hair in with the hair dynamics. I even spent pretty much a whole day trying to make hair cards, learning the process of making hair cards, which Unreal Engine definitely accepts, which takes a lot more time, like a whole lot more time. Which these hair cards, let me switch over to the other renderer. These hair cards are basically sheets with textures on them, and you generate the textures with the particle system. So basically you make a plane, and in that plane you make a flat long stack mesh, and you stick your particle systems in front of that, and then you render out an image of all that, and then use the textures here, and then you add transparency, which the EV renderer doesn't show the transparency in this case, how I've set up. The cycles renderer does. So basically you layer on a whole lot of these textured flat planes, and you bend the planes all over the character's hair until you have something that looks good. How well can these planes be animated dynamically through physics? I'm not 100% sure. I do know Unreal Engine does accept this because this is essentially a bunch of static meshes. Blender has an add-on tool that I can buy called Hair Tools, which not a lot of people use, but it seems like I can make particle hair and then convert it to not flat static meshes, but tubular static meshes, which may still be animatable. So if for some reason I can't bring in through the limbic system, yeah, if I can't bring in through the limbic system my particle hair, I'm going to go ahead and move on to creating the tubular hair, which has a more specific name to it. And if that works, great. And if that does not work, then I'm going to just move on to doing things in Blender, probably.